In the United States, the banking system is controlled by the Federal Reserve. What is the Federal Reserve? What is the Fed coin that folks are talking about? Will it take 3 years or will it take 30? Let's discuss. Hey everybody, I'm Gary Palmer Jr., you're you, together we're minting coins. So I want to thank you for showing up to this episode. We've been really discussing a lot about Bitcoin and blockchain technology, Bitcoin adoption across the world. We've been seeing how Bitcoin adoption is become legalized in Japan. We see how Bitcoin technology is making waves inside Russia, and how now Bitcoin is really pushing forward even in countries like India after decisions there from the India's central bank and the monetization of the $500 and $1,000 rupee notes. So in America, our banking system is governed by the Federal Reserve. And so a lot of people know what the Federal Reserve is, but do they really know what the Federal Reserve is? And so if you're getting involved with Bitcoin information and blockchain technology and news, you might have heard about the Fed coin. The Fed coin is a term that was coined, I believe, in 2015 that essentially refers to the US dollar on a blockchain that is owned and controlled by the Federal Reserve. But who is the Federal Reserve? What is the Federal Reserve? What is this Fed coin? Essentially, the US dollar is or could be seen as a competitor of Bitcoin and vice versa. So most of us are aware that there is a conflict that has the potential of coming ahead at some point in the future. So the Fed coin is an idea that could be implemented at some point that we want to be aware of, counter to Bitcoin. Bringing this back to minting coins and this channel and the information that I'm delivering with you, I want to make sure that we have as much information as possible. And that can be really difficult because there's not a lot of information out there to begin with. To make matters worse, the information that is provided could be doublespeak, double talk, war is peace, ignorance is strength, freedom is slavery type of information. And so even when we do have access to some information, we really want to think critically about the information that we're receiving, understanding what information are we receiving that is in front of us, and what's the information that we're not receiving that's not in front of us. So with that being said, in terms of what is the Federal Reserve, what is the Fed coin, will it take 3 years or will it take 30? Let's look in the market and let's discuss. All right, everybody, really quick, courtesy at coinmarketcap.com, taking a quick peek at the market. We see that Ethereum has been doing really well this week, and also Decreed is also up 23% for the past 24 hours, almost 37% for the past 7 days, while NEM has also done really well in the past 24 hours, 27%. NEM isn't a coin that I have a lot of focus on simply because of the way that the technology is structured. And if you have questions about NEM or if there's information that you want me to know about that, then feel free to put information in the comments below. It's just not a coin that I see a lot of attention to be placed, especially when we look at all the other coins in the market right now. The coin that's having the toughest time in the past 7 days and the past 24 hours is Litecoin, down to just under $10 at $9.73. Now, it's still not bad. Litecoin is in a great position from where it was, but there is a lot of funky business going on while Litecoin is in the process of activating SegWit, which will be great in terms of using Litecoin as a test net to test SegWit, since SegWit is software that a lot of people want Bitcoin to be running. But the problem there with Litecoin is that the same people, the same miners who are trying to prevent the activation of SegWit on Bitcoin are now actively seeking to prevent the activation of SegWit on Litecoin. So there's a little bit of uncertainty there, which I think is affecting the market for that coin. But if and when SegWit is activated for Litecoin, I would expect to absolutely see that price jump, if not double or more than double, for Litecoin. And I think the same would be said about Bitcoin, that you could easily see Bitcoin double if and when SegWit was activated with that. So before we get into today's article, I first wanted to go over some pre-information. And so to get that information for you guys, I went straight to the source, and I went to the federalreserve.gov, where they have a great website and a nice FAQ section. And one of the questions in their FAQ section is, who owns the Federal Reserve? And what they want us to know is that the Federal Reserve System is not owned by anyone. That the Federal Reserve System was created by an act of Congress in 1913, and the Federal Reserve System shares characteristics that are of both private-like and public-like. So what we have is based on the Federal Reserve Act, we have a system of federal banking that has what they break out into three parts. The first part is a central governing board, which is the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. That's the centralized head of the organization where all the decisions go up to. But the second part is a decentralized operating structure of 12 Federal Reserve banks. It's a really interesting word to see on this page, the word decentralized operating structure. There's other operating structures that are also decentralized. They're known as Bitcoin and other blockchain technologies. But did you know that our Federal Reserve is decentralized because they break up the power across 12 federal districts? The third component of the Federal Reserve is a blend of the public and private characteristics, which is, pretty ambiguous if you ask me. So this Board of Governors in Washington, D.C. is an agency of the federal government. The people in this board are appointed by the President of the United States and confirmed by the Senate. And the people on this board oversee the guidelines for the system. They oversee the 12 reserve banks. So this board reports to and is directly accountable to Congress, but unlike many other public agencies, the federal board is not funded by congressional appropriations. So if the Federal Reserve reports to Congress, but Congress has no authority to control their financing, then it makes it really difficult for Congress to have authority, since they have no way of controlling the behavior or punishing behavior through the market system, through the flow of cash. Only the people are voted in, appointed, and confirmed by the Senate, and then once that happens, all their decisions do not require approval by the President or anyone else in the executive or legislative branches. So that was the Federal Reserve Board. Separate from the Federal Reserve Board, we have the 12 reserve banks, which are each operating within their own particular geographic area or district. How many districts were there in the Hunger Games, by the way? Feel free to comment below. So each of these separate banks and their separate districts are separately incorporated, and they each have their own board of directors. The ownership of these banks as a condition of law is distributed with a type of stock, but the stock is just to represent ownership. The stock is almost like a token in the cases of these Federal Reserve banks, which is really interesting because I see so many similarities in this answer about who owns the FAQ to blockchain technology and to the philosophies of blockchain technology. This is just not using the technology and is more of a complex system, if you will. The last interesting point is that the Federal Reserve banks are required by law to transfer any net earnings to the United States Treasurer. So about the Federal Reserve, what does the Federal Reserve do? Really quick, I just want to go over what does the Federal Reserve do, just so we have this information. The Federal Reserve System conducts the nation's monetary policy. They promote the stability of the financial system. They promote the safety and the soundness of individual financial institutions. They foster payment and settlement system safety. They promote consumer protections and community development. Again, the three key entities that make up the Federal Reserve System are the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, the 12 Federal Reserve banks, and the Federal Open Market Committee, which is created of both public and private sector aspects of operation. So here's a little map of the United States that shows the Federal Reserve System broken up into its 12 districts and the location of the board, which I guess would make up the 13th entity, if you will. So that's a lot of information on the Federal Reserve System. Feel free to do your own research looking into the Federal Reserve's website, and then also looking for additional information on the web. You can find additional information all across Google, inside Wikipedia. I guess the bottom line is that the Federal Reserve System is just a really complicated structure. There's a lot of rules, a lot of circular logic, and so it's really interesting when we hear about information coming from people in the Federal Reserve. The reason I've gone over all this about the Federal Reserve is so we understand when one person makes a decision, or when one person says something, how that one person's opinion or decision or voice is just one out of countless people, most of which don't really have strong identities into who they are, or where they get their information from, or how they're making decisions. There's so few people who are accountable, and their accountability is to a minimal level. For today's article, I want to turn to CoinDesk, where we're talking about US dollars on the blockchain. So at the Business of Blockchain, this is a conference organized by MIT Technology Review and the MIT Media Lab yesterday, April 18th. There's this gentleman, Jim Cunha, who is the Senior Vice President of Treasury and Financial Services at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. So this is a Senior Vice President, and he is the Senior Vice President at one of the 12 Federal Reserve banks, and this is the one in Boston that oversees those. I believe in that map it was 5 states or so, a section of the Northeast United States. And so he says that he would not call the central bank's currency low-hanging fruit here. He says that blockchain offers potential for efficiency, and so what I'm hearing here is that he's directing people's attention away from equating Bitcoin and blockchain technology to the replacement of the US dollar. He's directing people's attention away from that because he thinks that he's saying that there's other areas where have greater opportunity for us to focus our attention on first. And then Jim starts going into talking about the issues of finality, which he refers to as the holy grail of financial services. So a lot of this information didn't really make sense to me when I was reading this. Jim says how a wire transfer is irrevocable, that the Fed would never ever reverse a wire transfer. So if that's a reason for worrying about Bitcoin and blockchain technology, then we know that it's very difficult to reverse a Bitcoin or blockchain transaction. So finality is not a strong issue with Bitcoin and blockchain technology, but he goes on. He says, just imagine, what if there was a 51% attack to decide to reverse a wire transfer? And then they would have to reverse a wire transfer. Well, for everyone to do that, that would be the entire network. And so for the entire network to go against one transaction, what essentially that they're talking about here is the central banks losing control over the system. So if the banks were to issue a true blockchain where the whole system controlled it, then the whole system of that blockchain could potentially get out of the control of the Federal Reserve Bank if 51% of the stakeholders in that blockchain decided to go a different direction. And so there's no way that the Federal Reserve would want to reverse a decision and not have the control over the reversing of that decision. So he goes on to say how a blockchain could impact the trust and other risk models of a currency. So he says because a distributed ledger effectively eliminates the middle person. And in most of these cases, the middle person is the bank, and Jim represents the banks. So he recognizes there would have to be a different legal structure in place, and that is big, complicated stuff. The way that I read this and the way that I interpret this is just that the banks and people like Jim realize that Bitcoin and blockchain technology is big. They realize that FedCoin is on the conscious mind of the people who are involved in the space, and the Federal Reserve recognizes that the Bitcoin and blockchain technology isn't ready for them to move forward with it, simply because for the banks to move forward with it, they need to have a greater sense of control, a greater sense of understanding, a greater sense of certainty that the system is going to perform the way that they want it, and not the way that 51% of the user base wants it to perform. So how is his, let's look into his thinking. How is he moving forward with the thinking about Bitcoin and blockchain technology as it relates to the financial industry? So he says first we have to step back and define the problem. He mentions when talking to CoinDesk that a lot of people are taking a leap of faith that, you know, a digital currency is the next big thing, and paper is so passé. And he's asking, what is the problem that we're really trying to solve? So this seems as like a little bit of misdirection to me. It's not just that this is a digital currency, because the paper in our pocket is also a digital currency. The money in your bank account is a digital currency. Your credit card, your debit card, the wire transfers from your employer's bank account to your bank account, it's all a digital currency. So treating digital currency as something new is just a misdirection of the facts, because digital currency has existed since computers existed way back, you know, the 70s or even the 50s. So he's asking, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? So when he's asking that question and he's directing it away from the digital currency and away from the paper, his goal is to direct the problem that we're trying to solve away from currency. And he's trying to direct the problem that we're trying to solve into what he notes as stocks, derivatives, trade agreements, which he notes are better opportunities for applying blockchain technology. Anything but a currency, anything but money, because that system we have and the new system is not something that we are able to control yet. So what are the plans for the FedCoin? Jim Cunha dismissed these rumors of a FedCoin. The FedCoin being a theoretical digital fiat currency that sprung out of a paper written by an economist where? At the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis in 2015. So Jim says right now he can categorically tell us there is no plan to issue a FedCoin at any specific date or time. So Jim doesn't say that there's no plan to issue a FedCoin, period. He said there's no plan to issue a FedCoin at any specific date or time. And keep in mind, Jim is one VP at one of 12 banks, which all report and work with a centralized authority. So maybe, we don't know if Jim doesn't have access to a plan, or if there is a plan, but there's just no specific date set forth for that plan because of so many details that need to get in line first, politically and legally, as Jim points out in the same article. So there's no specific plans for a Fed coin. There's just a paper that was written about it 2 years ago. But Rabla Ali, my apologies if I'm butchering your name, is a research scientist at MIT's Digital Currency Initiative. And he has formerly worked at the Bank of England. And he pointed out that different central banks do things differently. In the United States, we have 12 of these central banks as we went over, and one main one at the top. And he says that it's perfectly conceivable that the technology for digital fiat currency could develop, essentially inside or outside the banking system, but then later adopted by the banks after this technology matures and proves itself. And he thinks that ultimately you will see, in fact, a digital fiat currency as a foundation for financial systems. But he just notes that it may take as long as 20 or 30 years for that to happen. So could it be a 20-year or 30-year time horizon? Could it be a 2-year or 3-year time horizon? We have the great Bitcoin halving coming up in 2020. That's when the miners who receive rewards for mining Bitcoin is going to get cut in half from 12.5 Bitcoins to 6.25 Bitcoins. When that decrease in supply happens, there's going to be an increase in value as economic theory would dictate. That could be around a perfect time to introduce a new coin to compete and to take value away from Bitcoin as Bitcoin rises. Or is the technology going to develop? Is the blockchain going to mature? And then the Fed coin comes in 20, 30 years later after all these coins have had a chance to really root themselves into the system. I think it's difficult to say, but I think it's very important that we're paying attention. We all know what a digital currency is. We all know what a fiat currency is. The fiat currency is currency and money that's created by the government or the central banks. It has value because of the faith we give that bank. These are diametrically opposed systems, which is why it's important that we understand the similarities and the differences between each. So with that, we will talk again soon. I have new information and tips coming in, and I have new videos on the way to share with you, so be sure to hit that subscribe button. And if this video taught or inspired you, please hit that like button. It really helps, and I really appreciate your support. All right, so with that, thanks for showing up and have a great day. I'm glad together we're minting coins.